I'm going to take you down into the weeds. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about silts, what silts does, silts within the framework of the Sahel, within the framework of climate change. We're going to talk a little bit about the adverse effect of temperature, desertification, land degradation, what have you, and the extent to which the silts has been trying to actually work to remedy, to mitigate some of those impacts. So everything that has been said so far since yesterday and today fits nicely and serves as a framework for what I'm going to tell you. Now, naturally, in the discussion, you see that we're going to talk a little bit about wildlife. I'm going to just touch shortly on wildlife. It's going to be part of the talk, but not to a large extent, because we have much larger issues within which then livestock also, wildlife takes place. That is, generally speaking, I'm going to tell you just about elephants, of which there are 700. Each year, 10% of them are killed, poached. If you talk about rhinos, there are about maybe back in 1976 or 74, 50,000 of them. In 1984, when they did the analysis, about 30,000 of them left, and nowadays about 5,000 and so on. And likewise for some of the other species, so actually they have suffered a great deal. And so with that in mind, and plus, what I'm going to tell you is also, we are traversing a storm. Basically, how do we manage what you heard about lack of democracy and governance, what you heard about 60% of our population live in rural areas, and of those 40% who live in urban cities, 70% of those live in slums. The opportunities the brother Ali talked about, lack of opportunities, the young entrepreneur, and it showed certainly to what extent opportunities are there, so somebody needs to grab them. And those opportunities all need a framework. They need support systems. They need judicial and legal systems that will be able to, if you invest, you need to get a return on your investment, and if someone grabs your money, then you should be able to take that person to court and then get the winning without necessarily have someone else cooking the outcomes. So in addition to those, I'm going to give you some basic statistics that will serve as, and when we drop lower into the weeds, we'll be able to say, okay, given those raw materials, what do we have to do to get out of that situation? Generally speaking, the production systems made of agriculture, livestock, fishery, natural resource all together, they are all of subsistent farming nature. Not in that, those don't include the cocoa and so on, because there are a few of them in cotton production. These are mechanized. These are actually doing a lot better. But the money that comes out from cocoa and oil and all that kind of stuff does not always find itself into what to do with respect to generating actually the support services needed to improve the production sectors. Now, 60% of those who live in rural areas, about 70% of them live under $1 a day and below the poverty line. All right? Now, 60% live in rural areas. About 80% of them live below poverty line. All right? Now, Brother Ali told you about the number of graduates with university diplomas that come out of school each year. Even if we are conservative enough, want to say maybe 100,000 come out each year in any given country, no country has been able to create at least 20,000 jobs annually. Okay, so conservatively, 100,000 graduate, they come out each year. No country has been able to create 25,000 jobs. Now, population dynamics. You have seen from the various presenters, it is among the highest in the world. In some of the countries, about 6.7 or 7.6 children per family. All right? So that's population. education. If you look at production systems, if you look at the land, we know, generally speaking, in the Sahel, it has not been raining, and you'll see the picture that much. When it rains, it's very erratic. So of the available land, arable land available, only 3% of the land is irrigated. Now, if you produce under irrigated conditions, you only produce 3 months out of 12. And if you cannot satisfy your basic consumptive needs, and you live on less than $1 a day, and 70% of those are under the poverty line, where else are you going to go to make up for the difference? Right? Now, this is a storm, so we need to manage out of the storm. And on top of that, if we don't do anything with respect to population growth, but if we look forward to 2050, we will have to colonize another 125 million hectares to just break even. Untenable. Now, there are two curves in Africa that are of significance. The two curves are the population curve, going like this, and the economic curve. And if you take them over a 10-year period, the economic curve is not strong enough, as Brother Ali has demonstrated, 6% growth. And he said that if we go that way, maybe we probably need 20% growth over time. So in any case, if you look at the population dynamic curve that goes like this, and the economic curve going like this, trailing, and the gap widens so that this curve is not going to be able to move up faster enough to pull this one down. And we're just looking at maybe 20-year horizon. We cannot go beyond that because it's difficult to control. So what is making this happen? And so what is so difficult? What is this? Can we just look at them and say, okay, we can't do much about it? Or we need to do something about it, and we must do something about it. And it is really not that complicated. It's not that complicated because for over 50 years, and some of those speakers told you, in Africa, and you look at independence. At independence back in 1960, Africa, if you look at the economic curve, it's kind of slightly like this, and the Asian curve is like this. 50 years later, the reverse is now true. The Asian going like this, the African going like that. Now, you take any of the speakers here. They have gone to school, they have studied the best schools, US products, some other people went everywhere, and we all studied in the best schools available. When you come in, you go back, why can't we apply the same knowledge, the same science and technology to take care of some of those problems? When the speakers before me told you the policy environment, the politics, the presidential candidate told you the politics. And we need to think politics. So, you know what? Poverty, and these are the drivers. Girls not educated. They are given in marriage at age 13, 14, 15. By age 20, she has 3, 4, 5 kids. She barely has a high school education. What is she going to do with the 4 or 5 kids without high school education? And if you go back to the curve, the population curve, like this, that is what is pushing, actually, this curve going upward. The economic curve, if those girls get the opportunity to be educated and actually they become part of the labor force, and they actually generate income, then they don't have to produce so many kids. And I'm a Muslim. There's nowhere in Islam that says you must produce 10 kids, 15 kids. All right? The Saudis, right? And the Egyptians and so on, they have 2 kids, 3 kids, 4 kids, right? So why isn't it that just sub-Saharan Africa needs to produce more kids? Yeah, we understand the classical model says that you need to produce enough kids because a bunch of them die. And then so you have some of them that will provide you with labor. But since the Industrial Revolution, few gadgets, technologies, new science have emerged. We should be able to now actually not require labor from kids who don't go to school, but rather use, to the extent possible, machineries so actually to take care of the labor constraints. All of that together, now, for 50 years, the policymakers actually did not listen to the rural areas because they don't have voice. Now we have a new dynamic. We have the kids who graduate, kids who are connected to Facebook, to Instagram, and what have you. And kids who graduate with a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, and they sit there looking for something somewhere. 2 years, 3 years, they don't see any hope. Consequently, and one of the speakers said this, if you sat there for 2 years, 3 years, and you did not see $1,000 over a 2-year period, and a ruthless, a bandit, a criminal comes along and says, here is $1 million CFA. $1 million CFA is about $2,000. And you look at $1 million CFA and you say, okay. And the sister said that a soldier is making maybe $50 a month. The kid gets $2,000. He will give $1,000 to his family, and he takes the other $1,000, and then he goes into the bush. And he comes back shooting at his mother, his father, his uncle. And this banditry that is actually going across the countries, particularly the 4 areas now up to Mali and then Niger, Chad, and Cameroon, and Nigeria, is not religious of anything. It is a pure thug, because those same thugs go in the mosque, they go into a church, and they shoot and they kill a mommy, a daddy, a grandma, a grandpa, and so on. So what we are saying is, while at independence for 50 years, the policymakers have not listened to the mom and pop because they didn't have voice, the new generation of these kids actually bring a lot of pressure. And those are the folks that we need to basically, very quickly, and they change the game. So the usual game, the traditional game is no good. So what we need to do, and we argued in SILS that actually the solution should be derived from modernizing the production systems. When you modernize the production systems, you engage farmers, producers, from all walks of life into producing sufficiently more than once a year. You produce sufficiently to eat, and then you climb up and look at Maslow hierarchy of needs, and you see that when someone has enough to eat, someone aspires to climb in those steps, and then when we have enough to transform, and we transform, we create wealth. When we create wealth, we create jobs. And with those jobs, kids are not going to come and dwell in slums in the big cities. They're going to be able to stay outside in the countryside and engage in productive systems, not necessarily hoeing, but an engineer designing a platform, doing e-extension, connecting to for medical services and what have you. And then they won't go between Libya and European to fall in the sea, and then 1,000 dies and 800 actually unaccounted for. So with this now, we're going to walk through quick these slides. But I need to piggyback a little bit from what Ambassador Pope said earlier. You know, we didn't come here to talk and sort of basically have a good feeling and then nice coming to Maine, to Camden, and then go back home. And then when they ask me about what did you learn, what did you bring back from Camden? Ambassador Pope said that sometimes it's very difficult to balance national interest with reality. And that is, you folks sitting here, you took 2-3 months to prepare this, and you are sitting here listening to us, and truly, from here, you're going to get out of here with something around which you're going to put your hands. And I suspect some of us in this room love tree hugging, animal hugging, livestock hugging, and we should be able to have our politicians as well, policymakers, to say, by the way, business as usual is no good. That is because if we continue with business as usual, I mean, the thugs are not going anywhere. They have designed, created all kinds of ways of staying in power and running the clock. But the clock that actually pushes the kids to take guns and come into different places, here, Europe, Africa, it's not a good clock to look at and just keep ticking and ticking. Because it will tick and tick, and it's actually a very explosive cocktail about which we need to do something, and doing something is actually bringing back the basic fundamentals, creating jobs, creating wealth, so that mom and papa, when they sit at the table, the kids, if he wants to come to the US or go to Europe and so on, he can pull money from his pocket, stopping our daughter and sister and an aunt from getting 3, 4, 5 kids, give her a decent education so she can actually take part in the job. And it's at that price, and only that price, that we'll be able to say, at some point when it's all said and done, in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, in 50 years, the horizon 2050, we do not have the luxury, we in Africa, in this sub-Saharan Africa, we don't have the luxury to actually go and colonize another 125 million hectares to produce enough just to be able to eat. And that goes into the demographic dividend, where in fact right now we know land is degrading at an accelerated rate. If you look at the Senegal, you can see probably 4 million hectares, of which half is degraded, and we have images we can show you that. If you look at Niger, 14 million, of that 3 million are degraded. Luckily, Niger, through the regenerative activities, we were able to bring back actually 5 million into good production, and another 10. And we were able to bring actually degraded land into production and demonstrate that you take a degraded land, you bring it in, and actually you produce more than 1.5 times the usual yield. Consequently, you actually have a useful land. So with that in mind, this context, we're going to show you what SILS, what is it? Oh, on the podium. This is a bad one. Okay. Now, and I'm sorry I won't be able to speak to you about the entire sub-Saharan Africa, but I'm going to talk to you about the 13 African countries that are members of SILS, created back in 1973, naturally, because of this situation. All right? 1973, bad news. And this happened, and we don't show you people because a lot of people also passed away because of these problems. So here's what SILS, these are the 13 countries. It used to be, when it was created, Mauritania, Senegal, Mali, Niger, and Chad, and Burkina Faso, 6 countries. Shortly after that, Cape Verde, Guinea-Bissau, the Gambia were added 3 years ago. And so what happened when SILS was created? The mandate is to invest in research to take care of this drought and what can we do to produce under drought condition, mitigating the drought, get people to become more resilient, and water technologies application and so on. And so Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, Guinea, and Togo all of a sudden realized that the northern part start drying up and looking like Sahel. And that looked very ugly. So they said, oh, wait a second. And you know what? It started looking ugly because the conflict in Sierra Leone, going up to Cote d'Ivoire, denuding, degrading, you have a lot of, the brother told you, the internally displaced people, then the refugees and what have you, they go in and they apply a lot of pressure on natural resource, they degrade, and so those people have no idea what to do. And we'll show you a slide that shows that. So these guys, Guinea, Cote d'Ivoire, Togo, and Benin, were added to the mix. And so now what we're trying to do is actually deploy the knowledge and science that we have been doing that for the last 43 years to help the Saharan countries actually survive and face drought conditions. And these guys are also learning that stuff. So, SILS, its mandate is to invest in research in food security. You have no other business. Those people who created SILS said, we do not need the previous slide. We don't want to see that again. Okay? So, we have the executive secretariat in Burkina Faso, the regional center agreement in Niamey, and we have the National Institute, no, the Sahel Institute in Bamako. And look at this. So this picture, I was saying, this is Liberia, this is Ivory Coast back then. And by the way, in this room sits a gentleman who's been spending a lot of time in the Sahel and who knows about this. He has been there for 5 years. And there are also a lady and a gentleman, Ambassador Pope and Ambassador Pam White, who spent a lot of time. Naturally, a lot of other of you spent a lot of time, but I would just want to point out these guys know what I'm talking about because they were in the trenches. So you see Liberia, 1974. This is why Ivory Coast decided to join SILS. And look at this. It's not getting any better. Is it bad governance? Is it bad policy? It's a mix of stuff. And that stuff, we need to take care of this stuff. So if you look at the curve, you see, the behavior of this curve back from 1950 to here, pretty consistent. It rains and rains, started dropping. When we got to the 70s, and this is where the, and then so on, going on and on. Every now and then you see this, but this is nothing. And then even when we supposedly, we got the cycle sort of back to semi-normal, it was not enough to actually reverse the tendencies. Luckily, and I'm running out of time, so I'm going to tell you a couple of things. The World Bank is coming in. We said we cannot rely on rainfall distribution. They invested, we have a big project that's going to be designed to take care of it, because only 3% of African land, at least the 13 countries, is irrigated, and we cannot do much about that. Pastoralism, which has been neglected for so long, and pastoralism will allow us to fill in actually the huge space where bandits are roaming. And this pastoralism, about $248 million, and the African Development Bank also came in. And so we have now the African Development Bank, $250 million, World Bank, $250 million, the Islamic Development Bank, the USAID, the European Union, the French, and the Canadian. They're all coming in together and saying, and someone said earlier that there are opportunities, a lot of lights are shining upon us. We're going to say, okay, bring all the lights, because we're going to take them and do some magic. And if we get out of here, the rest of the slide, you can watch them later. If we get out of here from Camden Conference, and if we can craft a declaration, Camden Declaration, 2, 3 points, 4 points. I don't know what is reasonable. The writers are somewhere listening, the organizers are listening. Then we can take that declaration. I can't conceivably see us getting out of here without a declaration, because if you get so many people like this from different walks of life in the dead of winter in Camden, Maine, we must be able to put our hands on our heart and say, what we have learned, what we came here to share, actually make us believe that it feels good to have been in Camden, Maine, and that is a small task to ask. Thank you very much.